What's going on YouTube? This is Amisbro, and for this video I thought I would talk about, well, gaming in the 80s for me, and specifically we're going to talk about certain games in the 80s that I played that frustrated me and how sometimes I managed to go back to them. Alrighty? One game in particular we're going to talk about, obviously you know what it is because it's one of my most talked about shooters in the genre. And it is the Guardian Legend. Now, when you're a kid growing up in the 80s, you don't know all the history about the game. Who knew, unless you were somehow a complete goddamn nerd that was able to get a hold of a copy or the system that the original game came on, Guardic, how many people knew that the Guardian Legend or Guardic Gaiden was actually a sequel to an MSX game? Not many. You probably wouldn't have found out unless you owned an MSX, owned that game, and also owned a Famicom and owned a copy of that game. Guardic Gaiden. But not many people really got to know about it. And I say that because look at the system that the Guardian Legend came out on. It came out on the Nintendo system. The Nintendo Entertainment System. Well, what were the big franchises for Nintendo? Mario, Zelda, Metroid, probably Donkey Kong, etc., etc., etc. Whatever the first party games that they were pumping out, those were the big ones. And despite the fact that the Guardian Legend actually got a pretty decent advertising campaign, matter of fact, if I remember correctly, it was one of the it and the game Battle of Olympus, which were both published by Broderbound, both got pretty heavy advertising campaigns. But yet, I don't hear that many people talk about it as one of the definitive shooters on the system. And think about this. It had something going for it that at the time wasn't really mainstream yet. But I'll explain in a minute. The story of the game was you were the Guardian of Earth, sent by your people to go fly to this huge fucking planet which is hurtling towards us, called Naju, which has mysterious life forms on it. Your objective is to go land on the planet and go around each of the 9 areas and activate the self-destruct mechanism to blow it up before it crashes into Earth and kills everybody. That sounds simple, right? Well, not really. The very first level of the game explains to you just what kind of game you're dealing with. Oh, it starts as a top-down shooter, and it sounds very simple. Just fly up to the planet, get on, and start your game. It's not that simple, though. You see, friends, the planet kind of knows that the life forms kind of know that you're coming to blow the shit out of them. So here's what they did. They sent everything in the kitchen sink after you. Meteors, satellites. I call them Mariner symbols because if you look at them, they look almost like the Seattle Mariners old logo. Gun turrets and a gun installation to eventually attempt to do you in. But you're smart enough for them, right? You got on the planet. Now, you read a very cryptic message from the last survivor, and off you go. But wait a minute. Wasn't it just a ship a minute ago? Why, yes, it was. And this is one of the things that the game had going for it that at the time I don't think we really saw much of in video gaming. we always saw the female character as a captive, the damsel in distress, the character that you need to go rescue. Sure, there was a Super Mario Bros. 2 that came out in North America, but disregarding that, most of the time, the female was the rescuee. She wasn't the one that was blowing shit up. And before you guys even mentioned Metroid, remember this. No one knew Samus's identity unless you beat the game under 3 hours. If you didn't beat it in under 3 hours, and remember YouTube didn't exist back then, nobody knew that Samus was a female. So this makes, unofficially, Mira, M-I-R-I-A, the first female protagonist that I can remember in an NES game. You could probably count Cutie Pie also from a Steinax, but she was more of a sidekick than anything. But think about this. This game was a hybrid top-down shooter, and it was a pseudo-overhead perspective. As you were walking around, blowing up, shooting the crap out of enemies, and fighting sub-bosses. Yes, there were 10 areas to this game. One is the core, and then of course you have your underwater, your jungle, your ice/space levels. You have your biological, and you have your wasteland levels. And every single one of them had 2 levels. Underwater, areas 1 and 2. Jungle, 3, 4. Ice space, 5, 6. Biological, 7, 8. Wasteland, 9, 10. Wasteland/desert. You can call it either one you want. Because when you look at it, it is a deserted wasteland. So either one's acceptable. 10 areas and 21 corridors. But only 10 were required. But for you completionists out there, you know you're going to blow up all 21. And every weapon could be upgraded. Now, how many times do you remember a game back in the 80s that could do that, realistically? Think about that. There were many, especially games that were just space exploration like this was in many respects. They weren't out there yet. Okay, maybe Gradius, but I mean a game like this. A game that used the hybrid of top-down shooter and actual exploration of the bases. And the sub-bosses, shoo! You better learn how to kill them, although some are pretty easy. But you better learn, or they're going to hand you your ass. I promise you that. And don't even get me started on the corridor bosses. Figuring out how to defeat them, whew, good luck. Do you know that there's been at least one to two corridor bosses that I cursed out or wanted to flip off every time? One is the giant Medusa eye that comes at the end of Corridor 3. Dear God, was he a pain in the ass. And then you get to Corridors 8 and 18, and you're dealing with this big red or blue eye or whatever, and you're trying to kill it. You know how hard that can be? This was one of the definitive shooters, in my opinion, that you played back in the NES days. Because, again, in my opinion, we didn't have much like this yet. And truthfully, I don't think we still do. I mean, do this for me. Name to me the last top-down shooter with the space exploration that the Guardian Legend had for a console past the NES, because I can't think of it. Now, and mind you, I played a lot of NES games. I played a lot of Super Nintendo games, but I can't think of a game ever like that before. The last game I remember where you could have a female protagonist but you went around shooting up shit in an asylum, was loaded. Which is, by the way, one of my favorite PS1 games from back in the day. We'll talk about that one sometime. Going into asylum, running around shooting the crap out of people? Yeah, who didn't like that back in the day? Oh, come on, you know you did. Everybody did. But we'll talk about that sometime. Was the story much to go on? No. But you know what? It was enough, and if you let the title screen go, and the little information screens that pop up in the game that will tell you different things to help with the game, help you learn game mechanics and the plot. And they also were helpful in giving you hints on how to get into the corridors, because while 11 through 20 could be opened automatically, you need to know the key to get into 1 through 10, the key ones. Because if you know the secret, you could get in. Otherwise, there's something you missed, and you have to figure out what it is. This was back in the day when the games didn't hold your hand for you. If you fucked up and you missed something, guess what, kids? You had to figure out where you went wrong. You had to figure out where the information room was that had the secret that you didn't pay attention to. Genius, wasn't it? God, why can't we go back to those days sometimes? And you know what makes me so seriously, you know what makes me so passionate about this game and why I always bring it up to people every chance I get? Because in my heart of hearts, I firmly believe this was one of the greatest video games done. That had the graphics, had your gameplay, had the story that was as cryptic as all hell in more ways than one. Told you a little bit, and then you started to learn more about the story, you went, oh fuck. This is a dangerous situation, isn't it? And not to mention, as you get later in the game, some of the enemies actually also evolve. There's actually those little red and blue claw bots that actually evolve into huge walking robots that you have to blow up. Yeah. And you wonder why I get so passionate about this game? Think about it. It's one of the greatest video games of my generation. And I want people to play it. I don't care if you have to scrape them. It's like, I would say it's $2, but actually, according to eStar, it's gone up in price. It's like now $30 complete. No joke. But to this day, I firmly believe it is one of the greatest gaming achievements. Period. Having the female as the protagonist, having the upgradable weapons, which, like I said, I don't think we had those really back then. The last time I remember a shooting game where you could upgrade weapons by refining the power-ups or even upgrading them in some way, UN Squadron, where you had the optional weapons and you could buy upgrades to them. I think you could. Somebody will correct me, I'm sure. But dear God, did I love this game. And I still do. Matter of fact, I'm playing it right now, and I've gotten back to the section of the game that always held me up from beating it. The biological levels. I get through those, I'm moving on to the wasteland, and I'm eventually going to beat this goddamn thing for the first time ever. This game has been my tormentor. But you know something? I wouldn't have it any other way. And neither should you. Go get this game if you can find it. I don't care if you find just a cartridge. I don't care if you find it complete. I don't care if you download it on and play it on an emulator. Play the damn thing. You won't regret it. I promise you on that one. Will I do another one of these? Why, sure I will. And I hope that you come along on the ride with me, because I got news for you. It's going to be a fun one, kids. You take care now.